The Newtown shootings also occurred in a year when urban gun violence in Chicago had reached startling proportions. Enough, we said, is enough. The gun lobby is no match for the cross lobby.
The bodies of children had not even been removed from Sandy Hook Elementary School when the gun control debate reached another fever pitch. Those screaming for an end to readily available weapons. Those who snap back that responsible gun owners don't kill. We are 2 years since those murders, and simply stated, what have we actually done to make any real substantive change? First up, let's welcome a staff attorney for the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Allison Anderman joins us again. And he is the communications director for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms and recently co-authored the book Dancing in Blood, Exposing the Gun Lobby's Playbook to Destroy Your Rights. Dave Workman. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Allison, I'm going to begin with you. I talk about change. And again, there's a lot of anger on both sides here that change hasn't happened for whatever reason. What hasn't been done? What were you and what was this lobby promise that hasn't been done yet, and who do you blame?
Well, I actually think tremendous progress has been made in the 2 years since the horrific massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School. In fact, 37 states have enacted 99 laws strengthening gun regulations, most notably in the areas of background checks. As we know, Washington State enacted by voter initiative for the first time in our nation's history, a background check law. And lots of states, significant states, in fact, I want to list some of them for you because they're very notable, passed laws increasing the mental health records that are sent to the FBI.
Okay, how many states are there? We don't have time for all of them, but how many states are there?
Let's see. I have 11 states improve their laws regarding domestic violence, and 19 states improve reporting of mental health records to the FBI.
Okay, so let me get to this then. Allison, you're fairly happy then with what has happened. Dave, let me turn it over to you then, because I would guess that there are things that have happened. If what Allison says is true, and of course they are, these laws have been enacted, I would have to imagine some people I know who are gun owners are not real happy with a lot of these laws.
Well, that's right, Ed. Last Saturday, for example, more than 1,000 people showed up in Olympia at the state capitol to protest the passage of Initiative 594. That's the measure that Allison had mentioned. But I think if you look back over the last 2 years, some of the things that have happened were things that the so-called gun lobby recommended. For example, more schools have armed guards in them. More schools, there are several schools that have allowed staff to be trained and carry firearms in order to be the first responders in case of a tragedy like this. And I think that it's also important to understand that firearms ownership is on the rise, and yet violent crime is actually, according to the FBI crime stats, on the way down.
Well, I want to point on that one sec, Dave, because Allison, 52% of those surveyed in a Pew Research Center poll said it's more important to protect the rights of Americans to own guns. So there actually is, since Sandy Hook, there has been a rise in the people who believe we should be able to own guns. Does that bother you at all?
Not particularly, because when the question is framed that way, that's a typical response. People always favor rights over control in the abstract. However, when you actually poll the American people on specific policies, they overwhelmingly support policies to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people and require people to behave responsibly with their guns.
Okay, isn't that part of it, though, the dangerous people, Dave? I mean, that's a good part here. You want to keep it out of the hands of dangerous people and keep it in the hands of responsible folks, right? Don't we? We can agree on that.
No, we don't disagree on that at all. Firearms owners have historically wanted to punish the guilty, but leave the law-abiding citizens alone. 2 years ago, I was part of a group that appeared at a press conference. Then we went to testify in Olympia on behalf of legislation, unfortunately didn't go anywhere, that would have punished armed juveniles and recidivist juvenile thugs with guns, but it would have left law-abiding gun owners alone completely.
All right, now hang tight, both of you, please, here, because we have to take a short break. We will continue. We're going to move to smart gun laws. Let's also bring the National Rifle Association into this, as of course they always do every time this debate comes up. And simply, why we can never seem to find enough common ground to make real change occur nationwide on this issue. 43 minutes after the hour, we find common ground in making life a little better for our servicemen and women around the world. It's all coming up right here on MidPoint. Once again, let us welcome back the senior editor at Gun Magazine, Dave Workman, and she is a staff lawyer for the Law Center to Prevent Violence, Allison Anderman. Dave, let me begin with you this time, because as we talk about laws that have been enacted that are not, let's talk about the gun show loophole, which is what many people still focus on, that private sale, and that's the thing that people, and I would imagine the people on Allison's side who are really wanting more gun control think this is something that makes sense. Why does this not make sense, and why does the NRA and so many other people continue to fight against this?
Well, I think that the gun show quote-unquote loophole is kind of a myth. There's been studies done for the Department of Justice over the years that show that less than 1% of convicted felons who used firearms in the course of their crimes got their guns from gun shows. The overwhelming majority of those people got them from illicit sources, street sources. They were stolen guns. They traded for drugs for guns. They got them that way. They got them from members of their families and so-called friends. But very rarely do you find these guns that have come from gun shows.
Okay, well, let me stop there and let me go to Allison on that. Allison, he makes a very good point, and certainly the numbers seem to draw it out, that gun shows are not where a lot of people who commit crimes get their weapons.
That may be true, but we do know that 40% of gun sales occur between private individuals, and as of now, there is no federal law requiring background checks in those private transactions, and that is definitely how a lot of people who use guns to kill their spouses, women are 11 times more likely to be a victim of
but wait a minute,
violence.
hang on a sec here. I get all that, but if there's really not a lot of tremendous evidence that buying the guns here and transferring them privately leads to serious crime, that most of them come from other crimes, does it make sense to be going after that point?
I don't think that information is not, if you're talking about gun shows, that may be true. I don't know that statistic and I can't verify it. But what we do know is that 40% of gun sales occur between private individuals, not necessarily at gun shows, over Craigslist, in various other forums.
Okay, well, there's a good point. I'm going to stop you there and go to Dave. Dave, that's a very good point she makes, because a lot of guns are changing hands and we can't keep track of them if they wind up on Craigslist or any of these various websites.
Well, I think the 40% figure itself is bogus, and even the Washington Post called that a fib. They gave it 3 Pinocchios, which means it's almost a bold-faced lie. That figure's been kicking around for years, and it comes from a study or a survey, a very limited survey that was done prior to the enactment of the Brady Law back in, I believe, 1993. And now, today, I don't think that figure would really pass muster at all.
Okay, so we're going to go back and forth here on figures, and we could do this all day long. But let me do this, about a minute and a half that I have left here. Dave, I'm going to stay with you. What hasn't been done right now that needs to be done 2 years after Sandy Hook that you believe and gun owners believe would make people safer and lead to the cessation of crimes such as these?
Well, I think certainty of punishment is one of these things. We see time and again stories about recidivist criminals being out on the street, people who get involved in these drive-by shootings, who've got 4, 5, 6 felonies against them. You've got to lock these people up and essentially throw the key away on them. We passed 3 strikes you're out in hard time for armed crime in Washington State several years ago, and both of those initiatives, which swept the nation, were started by the so-called gun lobby.
All right, Allison, now I turn to you. The very same question. 2 years after Sandy Hook, what needs to be done in order to make people safer?
Background checks need to be conducted on any transfer of a gun between private individuals. Those laws are the foundational element of protecting our children and our family members from gun violence. They ensure that dangerous people do not have access to guns. And 90% of Americans, over 90% of Americans, support these laws, and they will continue to pass them by voter initiative if our legislatures and our legislators will not act on their behalf.
Dave, I only got about 40 seconds left. I'm going to ask you a question that comes up every time we hear exactly what Allison said. If you've got nothing to hide, why should you fear a background check?
Well, because these background checks, the way that they're designed right now, leads to registration. And we're seeing in places like New York and Connecticut where such laws are being used to actually confiscate firearms from families, bereaved families of people who passed away who were gun owners. And quite frankly, I don't think that a background check, me loaning a firearm to a friend and then having to go through a background check again to get my own firearm back, is going to prevent a crime anywhere.
Allison, I would guess that in the 10 seconds left we have, you disagree with that.
Yes, the NRA has really nothing to say about background checks, so they put out a lot of misinformation. On their website, they say that the Washington law created a waiting period. There's absolutely no waiting period in Washington state. There hasn't been. There isn't one now. And in the absence of a real argument against background checks, they have to make things up.
One of these days, we are going to come out with some real hard stats, and we're going to have to come up with a way to do things here and settle it out. Allison Anderman, Dave Workman, thank you both so much for your time. We are going to do this again. It's a continuing conversation on MidPoint.